Hi, welcome back. It's Anna
and Rose,
coming to you from the Mystery Parlor. Before we start, we've had so many questions asking if the owl mentioned in our first episode was okay. Yes, it was fine. We followed a raptor rescue's advice and it flew away the very next morning.
We are going to cover some of the interesting and spooky places we would like to visit in each state. A few places we've already been to. We will go state by state in alphabetical order, releasing a state episode every month or so. Buckle up and take a little trip with us.
First stop, Alabama. I'd like to start with literal meat and potatoes. If you plan to drive through Chilton County, between Birmingham and Montgomery, the diners along the way serve a signature meal. My husband Alan and I once stopped there for lunch. The waitress, who was very southern, recommended a whole hot or a half a whole hot. Alan went with a whole hot. He wasn't disappointed. It's a double hamburger, open-faced on a bun, smothered in cheese, gravy, and onions, with a pile of potatoes on the side. I think next time I'll order the half a whole hot.
We are going to begin and end this episode sharing an Alabama cemetery that we'd like to visit. First is the Maple Hill Cemetery located in downtown Huntsville, Alabama. This cemetery was created around 1822. It currently covers 100 acres and has around 80,000 burials. The cemetery is on the Alabama Historical Commission's Historic Cemetery Register.
Maple Hill's 80,000 burials and 100 acres can be considered an average-size cemetery. Let's compare it with some well-known cemeteries. Arlington National Cemetery has around 400,000 burials and is 639 acres. Lafayette No. 1 in New Orleans, which started in 1833, is only one city block, but it has around 1,000 burial spots and more than 10,000 people are estimated to be buried there. It is still in use today. We will do a deep dive on Lafayette No. 1 in a later episode. There is so much to cover now about the Maple Hill Cemetery. Let's begin with the main haunting story of this cemetery first.
The playground, also known by locals as the Dead Children's Playground.
There is a playground next to an area of children's graves. There isn't an exact count, but several hundred children died and were buried right by the playground during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic.
During that time, it was believed if you kept your windows shut, it would help keep the disease out. They even had a rhyme to help children remember not to open their windows. It went like this. I had a bird, its name was Enza. I opened the window and influenza.
That poem gives me chills. In less than 3 weeks of the Spanish flu arriving in Huntsville, there was only one pharmacist and one doctor left to treat patients. All the others were afflicted with the Spanish flu.
It is said that the children have remained children in death and come out of their graves to run and play. While visiting the cemetery, you may see an empty swing swinging, orbs floating, or even spectral child-sized figures roaming the area.
While researching the cemetery, we noticed that a Google review that stated, "Nice place to go for a stroll." After looking into this, it turns out there's an annual Maple Hill Cemetery stroll the third Sunday of October.
If 75 in-character costume historic figures, music, an antique auto display, and scavenger hunts for all ages is your thing, the third Sunday of October would be a great time to visit the cemetery. Huntsville seems pretty connected to their dead. For the living children in Huntsville and the surrounding areas, There's an educational field trip program that visits the Maple Hill Cemetery. It teaches about the history of past residents by stopping at their graves to hear about their lives and contributions to the community. The tour also covers how to use a compass, tombstone symbols, and basic cemetery etiquette. At the end, they get to do a tombstone rubbing as a take-home souvenir.
Now that's a field trip that I would have loved to chaperone.
One particular spirit at the Maple Hill Cemetery is named Albert Erskine. His ghost is said to reside at the Erskine Mausoleum, which Albert had built after his mother's death in 1915. The mausoleum is large and constructed of carved limestone. Albert was the president of the Studebaker Car Company from 1915 until his death in 1933. He sadly committed suicide in South Bend, Indiana, after he lost his fortune when the company went bankrupt during the Great Depression.
If you are visiting Huntsville in September or October, every Friday and Saturday there are 3 ghost tours to choose from. There is the Twickenham that tours the oldest streets in Huntsville, with historic stops along the way, including several mansions telling of the secrets behind the walls. There is the Old Town Historic District tour that starts at the courthouse, and finally, if murder history is your thing, the downtown tour is for you. Rose and I hope to go in October for the stroll and 3 additional days for the tour.
Our next Alabama stop is the Gaineswood Plantation House, a National Historic Landmark which was first called the Gaineswood Mansion, located in Demopolis, Alabama.
When I first read that, I said Demonopolis, Alabama.
General Brian Whitfield had the neoclassical Greek Revival home built by craftsmen and skilled slave laborers. It took 18 years to build and was completed in 1861. It stayed in the Whitfield family until 1923, when they sold it to Dr. J.D. McLeod. During the Civil War, the house was occupied by both the Confederate and Union armies at different times. It also served as a hospital for wounded soldiers.
The property and house was last sold to the state of Alabama in 1966 or 7, then transferred to the Alabama Historical Commission in 1971. The property was restored, many of its original furnishings donated by the Whitfield family, and has been open to the public since 1975. General Brian Whitfield enslaved many people, 167 people by 1850 as a matter of fact. Many of the haunted plantations in the South are thought to be visited by the souls of mistreated slaves who are forced to work in the homes and fields of ruthless owners, but not this one.
This plantation may be haunted by more than one spirit. What we know for sure is General Brian Whitfield's first wife, Elizabeth, died in 1846 during the construction of the house. A lady in white apparition, accompanied by the sweet smell of gardenias, has been seen throughout the house on numerous occasions. It is thought to be Elizabeth welcoming guests into the home.
Another ghost haunting the plantation is musically inclined. It is believed to be the nanny who came from Virginia to care for the children after Elizabeth's death. Her name is Miss Carter. She became ill and made it known that she wanted to be buried in Virginia if she passed. She died in the winter. The roads were a muddy mess, so her corpse was sealed with resin in a pine coffin until spring, when her body was transported home.
Some accounts have her coffin stored in the plantation house basement, while others state it was kept in a mausoleum. Either way, it is believed that her spirit became restless and has been haunting the plantation ever since. Miss Carter has been heard playing the piano in empty rooms. Other ghostly activity includes footsteps going up and down the stairs, cold spots even in the hot and humid summers, moving objects, doors opening and closing on their own, voices and conversations in empty rooms, and lights and orbs being seen both during the day and the night.
Are these phenomenon caused by Elizabeth, Miss Carter, or other spirits roaming the property? I'd like to imagine the conversations and whispers are Miss Carter giving Elizabeth an update about her 12 children she left behind.
Next stop, the Sloss Furnaces National Historic Landmark in Birmingham, Alabama. This site was a steel factory which was constructed in 1881 by James Withers Sloss.
The Sloss furnaces were built to produce steel and were located next to an important railroad crossing that put Birmingham, Alabama on the map.
Sloss used the cheap labor of recently freed slaves. There were 48 tiny houses built on site for these men and their families. The women on site would care for the children and make baked goods to sell to the workers. The housing was used until the early 1950s when it was demolished. The laborers at Sloss Furnaces worked grueling 12-hour shifts for little pay. These men had to work in temperatures of 130 degrees or more in the summer heat. The dangerous conditions at the site made things even worse for them.
Horrible accidents were the norm at Sloss Furnaces. Some workers fell to their death into molten steel. Others were slowly poisoned by carbon monoxide. Pipes filled with steam were known to burst, injuring those standing too close and potentially steaming them to death. At least one person had their clothing caught in a wheel gear, which pulled his entire body in and crushed him to death between the cogs of the gear. Here are a few of the true paranormal accounts at Sloss Furnaces. In 1926, an injured watchman said he was pushed from behind while he was alone. In 1947, a supervisor was knocked unconscious by a burned man, but no burned man was found. In 1971, a night watchman was assaulted by what he described as a half-man, half-demon.
Between the years 2000 and 2021, the site hosted an event for 24 days in the month of October for Halloween. It was called Sloss Fright Furnaces. This event had a large budget of $500,000 to make the Sloss Furnaces Hollywood thriller movie scene scary. With this event came a bit of folklore. The story goes like this. In the late 1800s, there was a man by the name of James Wormwood, referred to as Slag. Slag worked as the graveyard shift manager. He wanted to impress the higher-ups by speeding up production. He was abusive to the workers and made risky decisions. This caused 47 workers to die during his time there. Workers decided to take the situation into their own hands. The one and only time Slag inspected the tallest tank, he fell from the catwalk into the molten steel below with the helping hand of a disgruntled laborer.
Sloss Fright Furnaces was recently terminated after 22 years because the Sloss Historic Committee decided that the event didn't reflect their mission anymore. They have decided to focus on the historic value of the property.
Currently, there are several tour options at Sloss Furnaces. It also serves as a venue for events and metal art classes. There really was no need for the made-up Slag story. There are haunts and paranormal activities galore at this site. The tunnel pictures are terrifying just to look at.
Our next stop is Fort Morgan in Gulf Shores, Alabama, which is another National Historic Landmark. This former military outpost guards Mobile Bay. Construction began in 1819 and was completed in 1833. It was built by skilled masons, many of whom were, again, enslaved. It took 46 million cubic yards of brick to build.
We had to look up how big a cubic yard is. It's equivalent to over 210 liquid gallons.
The entrance is a brick tunnel covered by a mound of grass. Supplies were brought in by train. If you look closely at the ground in the tunnel, you can see where the rail car tracks were placed. The archways, coved ceilings, and walls are all made from brick.
If you've heard the saying, "damn the torpedoes," this location is where it came from. In 1864, during the American Civil War at the Battle of Mobile Bay, Union Admiral David Farragut said these words as he ordered his troops to attack a Confederate fleet, knowing the bay was heavily mined with torpedoes.
Fort Morgan was deactivated in 1922 after World War I, but was later reactivated in 1941 for use during World War II. It was abandoned in 1944. Let's get to the paranormal activity at the fort. In the 1800s, a young woman was attacked there. We couldn't find the details, but she had died from her injuries. She has been seen by many still roaming the grounds. It is said she is looking for her attacker.
The most haunted area of Fort Morgan is the old barracks. During the Civil War, a bomb went off inside a crowded room. Several men were killed by the blast, many others injured. Screaming has been heard in and around this room from down the corridor. Then, in 1917, a prisoner hung himself in the barracks area. It's reported his cries can still be heard at night.
What else might you experience at Fort Morgan? There have been orbs seen and captured in pictures, sometimes witnessed by several individuals at the same time. In addition to hearing cries and screams, there are footsteps heard when no one else is around.
You've been able to visit Fort Morgan and the museum there since 1967. Is this a spot you'd like to go to?
If the answer is yes, after a short 55-mile drive, some of which is along the coast, you can stay in our next haunted spot we are about to cover, Mobile, Alabama. Of the 13 most haunted hotels in Alabama, 4 are located in Mobile. And if you are going to the Sloss Furnace we talked about earlier in the episode, 3 of the other 13 most haunted hotels in Alabama are located there in Birmingham. While in Birmingham, you could stay at the most infamous haunted location in Alabama, the Tutwiler Hotel, or stay at the Hotel Indigo, which was once a medical building. Guests there have seen nurses in the hallways vanish into walls or doors right before their eyes.
Back to Mobile. In the downtown historic district of Mobile, you will find our pick, the Malaga Inn. The inn was originally built in 1862 as 2 townhomes connected by a dreamy courtyard. It was built by 2 sisters' future husbands as their wedding gifts. The very unique home stayed in their family until the 1960s, when it was renovated into the inn as it stands today. The most popular spirit here is a female dressed in white that can be seen outside room number 007 from anywhere in the courtyard. Lights are known to unplug themselves when no one is looking, and the antique furnishings move on their own. The main reason we picked this hotel above the other 3 in Mobile? Swaying chandeliers.
I mean, who wouldn't want to see a haunted swaying chandelier?
As promised, our first and last Alabama stories are cemeteries. After visiting the ghosts of Fort Morgan and spending the night at the Malaga Inn, your next stop could be the Church Street Graveyard in Mobile.
That is where you will find the Boyington Oak. This living oak tree is 60 feet tall and has branches reaching out 110 feet. Living oak trees look enchanting with curved or bent trunks and branches. Many have Spanish moss hanging from them. Church Street Graveyard is not affiliated with any church, but when it was opened in 1819, the remains from the Campo Santo, Spanish for cemetery, were moved to the Church Street Graveyard so the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception could be built. This was only 6 years after the area became part of the United States as a part of an annexation from Spain. In 1819, there was also a yellow fever epidemic in Mobile, causing the death of 20% or 274 of its residents. These were the first buried at the Church Street graveyard, even before the sale of the property was complete.
About the tree. In 1833, a 19-year-old by the name of Charles Boyington moved to Mobile. He found work as a printer at the Mobile Chronicle. He was friends with a co-worker by the name of Nathaniel Frost. Nathaniel was suffering from what is thought to be tuberculosis. They lived in the same boarding house, and Charles helped Nathaniel due to his illness. They had become close friends and were seen together walking in the Church Street graveyard. The next day, Nathaniel was found murdered, and Charles had skipped town.
Charles was quickly caught and found guilty of murder, even though he proclaimed his innocence. He was hung for the crime, shouting from the gallows, "I am innocent! I am innocent! But what can I do? When I am buried, an oak tree with 100 roots will grow out of my grave to prove my innocence." Charles was buried in the Potter's Field or Pauper section of the Church Street graveyard. That section is for the unknown, unclaimed, or poor. Charles was all of these. Even sadder, 2 people later confessed to the murder of Nathaniel Frost on their deathbeds.
The very next year, in 1835, a tree sprouted from Charles's grave. Today, 189 years later, the spirit of Charles is said to hang out around this very tree that he claimed would prove his innocence. Today you will find the Boyington oak on the outside of the graveyard wall. The wall was moved in 1910, leaving the tree and many unmarked graves on the outside of the cemetery.
The cemetery stopped taking burials in 1898 with the exception of Mobile's Renaissance man, Eugene Walter. Eugene's most notable titles were screenwriter, poet, author, actor, chef, the list could go on and on. While spending many years in Europe, he carried with him a shoebox of Alabama red clay. He received a mayoral dispensation and was buried in the Church Street graveyard in 1998. There are several types of tombs and headstones located throughout the cemetery, while the dates aren't legible on many of them. Strangely enough, some of them don't have any dates at all.
That ends our Alabama episode. If you have recommendations for places to visit in the other 49 states, please let us know.
We'll talk about traveling again in a month or so. Next stop, Alaska. I can't wait for our Louisiana episode. Alan and I just returned from New Orleans. I had an experience along with one of our tour guides at one of the cemeteries that I can't wait to tell you about.
And since we are still brand spanking new to this realm of podcasting, if you have a mystical, obscure, paranormal, or an out-of-this-world story we need to share, our email is open. Please send us your experiences at mysteryparlor@gmail.com. We promise to read and respond to each and every one of you.
One more thing. Well, 2 things really. First, a huge shout out to James. He is our Jamie, our editor-in-chief, and straight from Ohio State. Secondly, we truly appreciate you. If you'd like to help us bring you the best spooky content, information, and all the episodes we are researching sooner than later, Rose is going to share how you can help support the Mystery Parlor.
We have just created a page on a website called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can support us by giving us a one-time donation or subscribing to us for exclusive content. You can find this at buymeacoffee.com/mysteryparlor. Your support will help us with things like upgrading our equipment, planning on-site episodes, arranging for guest speakers, and more frequent episodes. You can also find us on Instagram using the link below.
Thanks for listening.
Bye for now.